Good morning, everybody. Good morning, realtors and community members. My name is Michelle Hobaugh, and I am your 2022 president, and I wish to welcome you to our member event called Avoiding Scary Mistakes. Today's format is a panel of various association members who will share their experiences for approximately 10 minutes each. And then we will turn it over to some question and answers. And so we've got some additional shares for you as well. And I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We have our current president, Jessica Bryan. Good morning, Jessica. We have an attorney, Maggie Davis. Good morning, Maggie. We also have a realtor and broker in charge, Jay Parker. Hey, Jay. And we also have realtor and broker in charge, Randy Voller. Again, please hold your questions until the end, and let's begin our today's scary mistakes with our president, Jessica Bryan. Jessica?
Hi, everybody, and thank you for inviting me today. I wanted to just mention that I've been a realtor for 38 years, and in 38 years, you're bound to make a couple of mistakes here and there. And some of them are scary, but they're like little scary moments, like, taking a client into the wrong house, the wrong address, because you forgot to double check before you walked in and actually surprising the residents. Not a very good moment for me. Or forgetting to ring a doorbell and walking in and catching a seller in the shower. So, those are little mistakes, but the things that make my blood run cold, that make my spine tingle, are those big mistakes. So, for example, getting a letter from an attorney who is letting you know that your buyers, not your buyers, but buyers are suing you. And such was the case with me when I received an attorney letter several years ago. It was actually in the beginning of my career, and I was working on site for a very large subdivider, developer, who had a subdivision of over 200 homes. And I was named in a class action lawsuit. And the developer was named, as I was, for misrepresenting the fact that these homes were a great investment. Now, for any of you who have noted or paid attention, excuse me, allergies, who have paid attention to California market, it is mercurial. So prices will soar and then they will plummet. And as I was selling these homes, people would come in and constantly ask me the same question: what do you think is going to be happening with these prices? And do you think this is a good investment? Well, I would always answer the same way. I mean, the exact same way. Well, sir, or madam, or Mr. and Mrs., I don't have a crystal ball. And I can't guarantee that this is a good investment. I can only say that, you have to look at the market, and when you go to sell, if prices are on the rise, and you might be making a profit. If prices happen to be falling during the real estate market that California has, you're going to lose money. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Well, my big mistake was not telling the developer that this question was repeatedly asked of me, because if the developer had known that, he might have developed some sort of disclosure statement, some sort of sign that we cannot guarantee that these homes, something like that. But I didn't mention it. What I did do, though, which was my saving grace, was that I made note in each and every one of the files of people who were buying these homes. Now, this was before computers. These were the dinosaur days, and we didn't have computers. So I actually had to make individual notes in each file. And I think there were 135 families who were involved in this class action lawsuit. And in their files where they had asked that question, I just made note. I delivered the talk about, investment talk, or a crystal ball talk. And so I would just note, see lot 101 for content. And so that's how I handled it. Well, when I got this notice from the attorney, as I said, my blood turned cold. It was scary for me. And I was pretty new, but I called the attorney and said, hey, wait, nothing could be further from the truth. I told them the exact opposite, and I've got proof. So the attorney for the developer actually had somebody go around and collect 135 files, and in each one of them he saw the crystal ball talk. And so I got a call a few days later, and believe me, I was really nervous, but he called me and he said, not only have you saved your developer millions and millions of dollars if the judgment had gone against him, but you also have guaranteed that you are going to have job security for a long time. And in fact, I worked for them until I left LA and moved here 27 years ago. So it was really good job security, but it could have been one of the scariest mistakes ever. And I probably would not be here today talking to you. I'd probably still be behind bars or something. But here's another quick story about a scary mistake that maybe didn't go so well. And this was one of my agents. I was broker in charge. It was many, many years ago, but let's call the agent Susan. And she was working with her cousin, let's call her cousin Molly. These names are changed to protect the innocent. But Susan was going to show Molly a house that Molly wanted to buy, a new home. And the home was vacant. And Susan pulled the MLS sheet. And mistake number one, she wrote down the lockbox combination on the MLS sheet. And she unlocked the door. Mistake number two, she handed the MLS sheet to her cousin Molly. And they walked through the home, and Molly really liked the home. And Molly said, let me think about this for a few days and I'll get back to you. So when Molly got back to Susan, she said, after a few days, she said, I would like to make an offer. And they did, and it was accepted. And a few more days went by, and Molly called Susan and she said, you know, I need your help. I've lost the combination. And I'd like to take my parents in to see the house. Well, Susan freaked out. She said, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to have the combination. And then she remembered that she had written that down on the MLS sheet. Well, she explained to her cousin, you can't go into the house without an agent, and told her about the MLS rules and that, you know, an agent did need to escort her through. And Molly kind of gave an embarrassed giggle and said, well, I've already gone through this house many times on my own. But yeah, you can take us over there. So Susan did, as she took the parents as well. And they kind of scattered when they walked in. It was a vacant house. And so Susan just let them walk through and measure windows and whatnot. And she got on her phone and answered a few calls while they were doing what they were doing. And when they were through, they came back to the front where Susan was stationed, and they said, we're through. And she, mistake number three, just ushered them out and locked the front door, not checking to make sure that the home was secure. Mistake number four, wait, it's maybe mistake 1, 2, we're at mistake number 3. She trusted that her cousin was going to be honorable about this. So a few days go by and she gets a phone call, and a very, very angry phone call from the listing agent, who says to her, what did your client do? She had, when the listing agent walked into the house, the first thing that hit her was stripes of paint that were not there before, of different colors, color swatches of paint that had been painted on the living room wall. And subsequently, they figured out that the back door had been unlocked by mischievous Molly, who decided she really did want to go back in and just see how the different colors looked before she moved in. Needless to say, there were some stressful moments as Susan had to explain to Molly that she was not allowed to trespass or to deface property. We were relieved that the home closed and closed on time without any charges being filed and without us having to visit Molly in jail. But we always remembered that mistake and how costly that could have been. That's it.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. That is kind of scary too, to think about that, getting the phone call from another agent saying, what's your client been doing? We're going to turn now to Jay Parker. And remember, we're going to have a question and answer after all four of our panelists. So Jay, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Jay Parker with Weaver Street Realty. We've been in business for 7 years. I was broker in charge for a whole lot of those years. And luckily, we escaped ever having any like really scary stories like we all know can happen in real estate, things where people are personally or physically threatened or terrible accidents, that kind of thing. But I do have some stories that relate along, and I'm going to use a sort of Halloween theme. So my first category are be careful where you tread. One that first comes to mind, which is really a Halloween related story. An agent who used to be here, who's now retired, and who was a very literal, feet on the ground, no nonsense personality. I knew her very well. And the last person who'd be suggestible about the spirit world. And she reported she came back in the office one day and she was like really shaken. And she had been showing a house. And when she went upstairs, she said she was overcome by a feeling of horrible dread and overwhelming fear, and ran out of the house and would never go back in. And she told us with the caveat, like, I am not somebody who ever would believe in ghosts, but I guess I do now. So this fits into the category of like, that's not one you could avoid, but there are some mistakes you can avoid, like another of our agents who went into a house and encountered a couple in il flagrante, in amorous embrace, and had to backpedal with his client. So ever after, he calls out whenever he opens the door of any house before he shows it, "Ho the house," twice, really loud. I had a similar kind of experience where I went to show a client a property way back off the road, like we often do. And it was a dark, funky kind of house. And the actual owners live out of state, and one of their kids was living there or something. And luckily I did call out, having learned from my friend, so that they knew we were there. And when we came in the living room, there was a bomb still smoldering on the coffee table, and they had just run out the back door into the backwoods. So I had learned the lesson of always announce yourself when you're coming into a house, because there may be somebody there when you least expect it. And then I have some alarming tales, which have to do with security systems. And all of us, this is one of the bugaboos of our business, is having to deal with people's security systems because they leave them on during the time they're trying to sell their house. We have had, just recently, my partner Gary and I have a listing in Siler City of this beautiful farm, with a beautiful farmhouse. It's now vacant, but she insists on keeping her alarm system on. And we have now had two different agents who went in. One is not in our MLS system, and he actually has it under contract, and he was going out to look at a different part of the farm and told me he wasn't going to be going in the house. But lo and behold, he did. He had never found out what the security system information was. He calls me while he's standing there with the whole thing going off. Of course, my client immediately calls me. What's going on? I've heard from our security company. Luckily, the police didn't show up. This was on the heels of another agent doing basically the same thing, but that time I caught it quickly enough that our client did never even find out. So, you know, it's constant, and I imagine many of you have had similar experiences. My best one, though, was a house in Carborough many years ago, a little pink house on Main Street. And I had been in the house and was going back a second time. And the listing agent was someone who was new in the business, although she'd been in town for a very, very, very long time. And this was like her first listing. And going back the second time, she was going to be out of town, and she gave me all the security information, like the password, which was Bluebird, and you know, the information to call the security company. And I just thought to myself, wow, here's somebody who's really doing an impressive job of being careful. So I go back before my client gets there the second time, walk in the house, press in the code, doesn't work. Press it in again, doesn't work. Starts going off like louder than any bell I've ever heard in my life. It was worse than anything ever in a school or any place I've ever been. Wouldn't stop. I'm pushing it. I'm pushing it. I run out to my car. This is in the days of bag phones. And I call the security company, give them Bluebird. And they say, well, we can't turn off the alarm system, but we can say that you've you know, satisfied the alert. As I'm doing this, the 3 squad cars of the Carborough Police Force come in to the circular driveway at either end, and they're walking up toward the house, and one of them has his hand right on the handle of his revolver. And I'm sitting in the car, and I hand him the bag phone and say, here, this is the security company, and he talks to them, and it diffused the situation. It turned out that this house was occupied by a woman who had a partner living in the house who had just gotten out of the Orange County jail for domestic abuse. And I'm in this house with the alarm going off, and the police come in because they're used to coming to report to this house, and had arrested this guy, you know, like 2 months beforehand. And as this is all starting, this whole circus is starting, my client pulls in just ahead of the police. So he's getting out of his car, and the police are coming in all over the place. And we went ahead and showed the house with the alarm going off most of the whole time. A neighbor finally came, and on about the 30th try, somehow the code worked. The guy bought the house. So a scary sort of happy ending. But I learned from that to, if somebody gives you a whole lot of information, ask why they're giving you so much information, because it turns out she knew that there'd been problems with the security system and didn't tell me. So I try to get all my clients, if possible, to just disarm their security systems while we're trying to sell their property and while it's being inspected and everything else. Sometimes I think maybe I just shouldn't take listings that have security systems, but definitely be sure to tell every agent who's going to go anywhere near the place all the information, instead of taking for granted they're going to do what they said they're going to do. And then I turned the page. We had some good measurement stories, being measured for a coffin. We had one where an agent mismeasured a house by 1,500 square feet by just counting upstairs space that wasn't fully finished because he was standing outside and just multiplied by 2. And we didn't find this out. The buyer's appraiser certified the exact same square footage. 3 months later, the guy comes to our office, calls us up and meets with us at our office because he had discovered this error And it turns out that this I called the appraiser and she said, oh, well, it looked like a difficult house to measure. So I just used the agent's numbers. And she got out of it with just paying like the appraisal board. She didn't care if he went to the appraisal board. She gave him back the money for the appraisal. We ended up having to pay quite a bit of money to avoid this guy taking us to court. That was the first time I found out that our errors and omissions wanted to litigate anything you handed to them, and it automatically rang up your whole deductible of $5,000 just getting it ready, and then put you through a whole court case. And that same agent had made a much smaller mistake on a house that really was weird to measure in town. And again, the appraiser certified it exactly. We found out a year and a half later, the people had bought it to flip. And when they put it back on the market, they had a professional measurement that came in with a different number. And it turned out that our agent had made a particular geometric mistake that was easy to make. And the appraiser made a different geometric mistake on the same property and came up with the same number. So again, we settled for some small amount, relatively small amount of money. We had another where one of our agents on a subdivision she was representing pulled the wrong version of the map to put in the MLS. And after it was sold, the people came back to us. So the story, people nowadays, I don't think, try to measure their own houses anymore very much. Used to be, there were people who prided themselves in doing it and doing the most complicated houses. But I warn everybody, don't ever put your name on data about how big a house is. Hire somebody who does it every day for a living. So with the map thing, it's like, just be careful. That was an agent who took everything serious as a heart attack when she made a mistake or thought she'd made a mistake. And she lost a lot of sleep and had a lot of self-doubt that she carried around for a while. And my two takes on that are just try to be careful, but also, hey, stuff happens. What can you do? So luckily, like I say, we've not had really unfortunate mistakes. Like I had a real Halloween terror once when we got a phone call at dinner that our daughter had been hit by a car trick-or-treating in Durham when she was 14 years old. And luckily, she had a terrible leg injury and she's 29 years old now and she's perfectly fine. But I put in context how scary stuff can be with something like that. And business just doesn't live up to that. So happy All Hallows Eve to everybody. May you have a safe and happy one.
Thank you, Jay. We really appreciate the stories about the alarms and measurements and scary stories of that. Oh my, I think perhaps the bag phone is just as scary, to be honest, to think about it today. So now we're going to move to one of our amazing attorneys and sponsors, Maggie Davis, if you will please.
Hi, pals. I really love the way Jay ended because it's one of the things I tell the folks I work with regularly that, we don't save lives here. I know that what we do is a ton of pressure and we are dealing with people in, one of the most stressful and probably expensive transactions that they're going to have in their lives, but we don't save lives. So, but I had a couple, I know when I spoke with Cub and agreed to come on and do this, he was really thinking about wire fraud because I've talked to you all about a wire fraud before, and that is legitimately one of the scariest parts of my job. The upshot there, and I'm going to wrap it into, I've got kind of two big messages. And one is when you start, the two, to me, scariest things is when you start, this is the royal you, it's us attorneys too. when we start trying to make things too convenient for our client and we kind of lose track of how things are supposed to go. And the two examples I'm going to give on that are forwarding wire instructions. Y'all, as real estate agents, you should never touch anybody's wiring instructions. Just don't. You may have them saved, unsave them, unremember them. Just make your client contact whoever's account it is directly. You know, if it's us, it's usually us as the attorney, but you know, just, I mean, you can help facilitate it to the point where you tell them who to call and all of that. You all don't want to be touched in that. You all don't want to be in any way implicated in, did they get the wrong wiring instructions from me? You know, we spend a considerable amount of time checking our email security, making sure we've got double authentication, going back regularly and checking our rules. Internally, we have all sorts of ways that we check and make sure that we're not email hacked, so that our wiring instructions are getting where they need to go. And then we double check with the person in real time. So unless you have all those protections in place, just don't even do it. Don't touch it. Let that be our responsibility. And the other one, and I have seen this so much lately, I wish I could tell you I hadn't, giving keys before recording. We all know it's a no-no. Everybody knows it's a no-no. But you got those buyers standing there, you've just done the walkthrough, you're just about to go to closing, you know that lender's already funded it, you know it's a cash closing and the money's already there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You hand the keys over and you say, don't do it. Don't go in before you hear from me. Oh man, I spent an hour and a half talking some sellers and buyers down off a ledge last Friday, where the buyer had somehow gained access to the house. I don't know how it happened. She gained access to the house. She received the delivery of her furniture. The sellers hadn't even signed their seller documents yet. Oh man, it was a mess. The tensions were so high. The buyer it was a cash closing. She'd already sent her money. She'd already signed her HUD. She just assumed the house was hers. And she started acting that way. Neighbor texted the seller showed up. It was a mess. Just don't give the keys early. Don't forward wiring instructions. I know that those are two simple things that we can do, that you all can do to make your clients' lives easier. But the risks that go with those things are just so high. I should say giving keys early. If the seller gives explicit permission, well, that's a different thing. That's a different scenario. So those are my two. Trying to be too helpful will get you in trouble. Forwarding wiring instructions and giving keys too early. But the other one, Chris Mann and I were kind of spitballing ideas on what I would mention to you guys. No, this is for buyers. Know what your client wants to do with the property. I know when I have been a buyer, and I've been with agents, they're like, tell me your dreams, tell me your must-haves, tell me your, and those are the exciting things. But the number of times I have had people come back to me, either in the process of closing or after closing, in days of yore when due diligence fees were $500, it was one thing to discover that your client wanted a pool in the backyard and pools were prevented by the covenants or zoning or whatever. But now those fees are $10,000, $30,000. We've had $250,000 due diligence fees. So in the midst of due diligence, when we discover covenants that maybe have limitations that might actually be normal, and I'll give a couple of examples in a minute, those aren't title defects, and those are things that your client loses the due diligence fee on. And with due diligence fees being what they are, It's insane. There's so much. There's so much risk. The other two things would be like leases and profits and loss if it's an investment property. What kind of money do they need to make? What kind of documentation do you need to get? And keeping your due diligence fee reasonable in the offers while you collect that information, or collect it in advance of contract. I'm going to give you a couple of specific examples on this one. I had a buyer contact me. Thankfully, we weren't the attorney, and I don't actually know who the agent was, but client was selling his house and buying a house somewhere out, I want to say it was North Orange, Caswell County, South Caswell, somewhere in there. He was buying 10 plus acres. And the reason he was moving was he wanted to be able to do target practice in his yard. And he was a dog training professional. And he wanted to have all of his dogs. He has something like a dozen dogs, 10 dogs, and they're all German Shepherds. So they're all like enormous, right? He says he was explicit about it with his agent, and his agent, so his current house, he couldn't have all that. He was buying this new house for it. Due diligence was $30,000. Restrictive covenants totally prevented more than 2 dogs at a time, and totally prevented firearm discharge in the neighborhood. It's not a violation by the seller because the seller didn't know, and that's all public record. So it's just a good example of, if that sort of question is asked of you, write it down. Just like Jessica was saying, write it down, make a note of it in your file. Somebody comes back to you and says, I said this. You can be like, well, when we were seeing that house, you said you wanted your dogs, and I asked how many. Having investor clients, do be careful. So many restrictive covenants, way more than you would think, prevent renting, even long-term renting. And certainly a number of them have been revised to prevent Airbnb. So if you know that your client is looking for investment properties, really dig down before you're making those offers. And certainly if the offers have high due diligence fees with them. And I think that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That is kind of scary to think that you've got $30,000 of due diligence out there and it's just twisting in the wind. We'll have some question and answers after the full panel, but next it is last and not least, of course, let's hear from our friend from Randy Voller. Randy?
Great to be here, Michelle. So I've been in the business for 30 years, started off with HB&W with my sales license back in the day, which they don't even do that anymore. VRC, our company, started as Voller Realty and Construction in 1995. So this is our 30th year. There are 4 ways we can make money in this business. And so I'll have examples that connect to all 4 that I'm aware of or personally involved with, or agents or people that I've been in business had these experiences. 1, we can make money on raw land. That's if you're selling raw land or you're doing timbering or things like this. One thing to note, if you're dealing with raw land and someone has a timber deed or something like that, make sure that they know where they're timbering. Because I call this a redneck ATM. A lot of people go out and timber land to make a little bit of money, but there are times when people actually don't timber the correct land, or they don't have permission to timber the land. Now, a timber deed will be recorded, but if you're involved with a listing or a property you're buying and you have people who want to come out and timber, make sure that you're involved with the process and they know where they're supposed to go and they actually have permission. Sometimes in large families, entrepreneurial relatives will timber the land without the permission from the title holder. Not a good thing to happen. Second way we make money in this business is in the entitlements process, where you take raw land and you get it approved by the county or the town, and thus you can sell a subdivision or you can sell something with entitlements. If you're involved with property that have entitlements, especially older ones, you need to make sure that those entitlements are good today. a lot of people have properties that are grandfathered in, especially when we're dealing with buffers for water. We're dealing with buffers on riparian waters, where you have Jordan Lake rules now, you have new rules in Pittsburgh, you have Jordan Lake rules. People don't realize that they're grandfathered in, and I've had listings and things where somebody filled in a ditch and suddenly Division of Water Quality comes out and you're slapped with a $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 fine because they thought that they could put in, extend the pipe on the driveway, and it turns out you can't do that. You could do that in 1985, you could do it in 1995, but you couldn't do it in 2010. And as a listing agent and you come out, you need to inquire about these things, because the next way we make money, of course, is during development. And of course, then when you get a house, the worst thing that you can ever hear from a client, and I know anyone up here who's a BIC will attest, I'm a DIY kind of person and I did all the work myself. Now, if they tell you that and you come into the house and it's not permitted, you got a problem. And I've had experiences with people where they built an entire brand new deck, looks gorgeous, with the most expensive wood from Brazil, but guess what? No permit from the county. And the way around this, guys, is have a relationship with a really good structural engineer. Luckily for me, I had a guy that was a top engineer for the city of Raleigh, did a lot of work together. And every time I was in a bind, I'd call him up and say, could you please come out here and look at this and do the investigation? It's worth the money. An engineer's seal will trump what's going on over with the Department of Inspections. They respect it, and that will get you out of the jam. But when you have someone say, I did all the wiring, I did all the plumbing, and by the way, I did this deck myself, you have to ask the question, because if you sell the property and you didn't do that, that's a boo-boo that could be an E&O issue. Now, when I first started in this business, a lot of you, if there's any younger people on this call, I was working for a company and they always say, call your friends, family, who you play softball with, and get them to, to let them know you're a broker. So I was at HP&W and I let this fellow know I'm a broker, and I played softball with him. He was 25 years older than me. I respected him. I was in my 20s in Chapel Hill. And I thought, I'm just going to defer to him and I'm going to help him with the transaction. So I'm selling his house in Hillsborough and we're buying a house near Woodcroft. Well, this particular guy was quite frugal, and the frugal clients can get you into the worst trouble, because when we did his house and listed it, turns out that he had a major problem with his floor joists and his beautiful fireplace was caving in. And everyone, and we all know we have moisture in North Carolina and we have issues underneath the house. Well, back in the day, we didn't really have building inspection departments like we do now. And sometimes you go under there and find out someone shoved a screwdriver in there to shim it up. I can tell you dozens of those stories. Well, in this case, I asked him, I said, I'll protect his name, Joe. We'll call him Joe. I said, Joe, why didn't you know this when you bought the house? Because he was very frugal and very angry. He was going to have to pay thousands of dollars to fix this. He said, well, I didn't get an inspection. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I hired my brother-in-law and he was a general contractor, and gave him a case of beer and we went out for pizza. And I said, well, didn't he get under your crawl space? He said, oh no, he was a portly man, he couldn't fit. So he just flashed his shine his flashlight in there, told me everything was fine. I said, well, we're screwed because you got to refix this. So I'm thinking that's the end of the problem of this transaction. This is the next thing to learn. If you're selling a house, and he was buying a new house in this neighborhood near Woodcroft, and I was all excited, make sure that they get their insurance to begin on the day of close. Some people will be frugal and want it to start the next day. Well, this guy, of course, did not hire movers. He was doing it all himself, and he got himself the moving truck, and he decided that he was going to back that truck up right up to the front and unload his stuff in there with his girlfriend. And wouldn't you know it, he smashed right through the beautiful southern front porch. Just completely destroyed it and smashed his moving truck. So I thought, no problem, you're insured. His insurance kicked in the next day. It all came out of his pocket. He looked at me and I looked at him. I said, I didn't tell you to do this. And of course, me being 25 years younger, I took a lot of grief for that. But I learned from that day forth. Number one, make sure that you ask your sellers, did you get this house inspected, and get a seller's inspection. Number two, always get all the inspections and don't let your client bully you because they're frugal. And number three, because frugality in real estate a lot of times will cost you. And number three, make sure they know about what to be handled on day of closing. When Maggie talked about those keys, that's another thing. Make sure that you're very particular about that, because if people make mistakes on closing day, especially if the attorney was not able to record the deed and we're a pure res state, so it still belongs to the seller. If it's not recorded, certain things will not pay off if they smash into the house. So you really have to monitor that. I've had a couple other funny ones over the years. I had one where we used to sell houses in Chatham Forest. I developed Chatham Forest, where we let people come in there and they could fix up over the garage. And I would put all the sheetrock up there, and it was a DIY project for later, so they could buy in at a certain price and then they could get another 300 square feet in the future. And everyone loved this idea. It was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Well, as Jay referred to, people can get kind of lazy with doing their measuring. And so I had an appraiser call me and say, I don't understand this deal. The house should be only 1,600 square feet. And I said, and where did you come up with your values? I said, did you actually check to see if they finished inside over the garage? And they had not. Just like in Jay's example, they had not gone in the house. Turns out it was 300 more square feet. I wasn't even involved with the transaction. They were calling us because we were the developer. And I said, you have a problem and you better go get in that house and do a proper measurement, because these houses have the ability to finish over the garage. And if you're doing drive-by appraisals and certificates of opinion on the basis of a drive-by, you have an E&O problem. So again, it always pays to do the extra work you're supposed to do and not cut corners. Another thing you should be very aware of in the process of how we make money in real estate, from development to how we finish, is you need to pay attention to how the development is done, and really pay attention if it's a public street or a private road. You really have to ask that question, because if it's a private road, as Jay will tell you, and Jessica and Maggie and Michelle, the people on the road have to pay the maintenance. And you may drive down and see a nice shiny paved road and think it's a public road and DOT or Chapel Hill or Carrboro or Hillsborough is going to maintain. Not always the case. And that can cost you dearly if you sell it as a public road in MLS, or tell people that and find out there's a maintenance agreement. So you must be diligent about the infrastructure. And then finally, with the houses, and with the sale, you can have things such as deed of corrections. I have still signed deed of corrections as a developer when a surveyor did a survey many years ago, and they come back later and it turns out they found an error and they re-recorded the survey, but we already sold a lot on the basis of the original. And I just had one where 15 years later, we signed a deed of correction. Again, pay attention to all these details and ask those questions. A lot of folks do not want to spend money on surveys, and they think it's a waste of time and a waste of money, especially if you're dealing with an in-town lot. I will tell you that some of the most good money to invest in the process is advising people to get a survey, because surveys will turn up issues that could be title defects, encroachments, and other problems that your seller or the neighbor will not tell you about. For instance, they've been arguing about the property line for 50 years, and that survey will indicate it. The survey tells all, and it's worthwhile to tell your client to pay for the survey, whether it's the buyer or the seller, because once you have the knowledge, you can fix the problem. But after the fact, it's incredibly costly, and you could be in a liability situation. I've even had cases where I came in later on a deal, and it turned out they sold the wrong property because the lawyer's paralegal actually put in lot 6 when the client was on lot 5, and no one had bothered to read the deed. So technically speaking, they didn't actually own the property. but a deed of correction was done later and fixes. These are things you should be aware of. So when you get into your listing or buying, you should read this data and you should verify this or find an appropriate professional to help you with this. I don't know how much time I have left, Michelle, but those are just a few of the many fun things you get. Obviously, being a publicly elected official, I had a lot of that came into play too, where people weren't aware of things and then they want other folks to actually fix their problems. Do I have any time left?
If you want to take one more
Oh,
stab at it, I'll give you
my
4
last
minutes.
one, I have two this one relates to public, and this is an example, again, I know about personally. There was a case with so I don't know how many people do property management, where a guy who was living there was a high-priced lawyer that was out of town all the time and divorced, had 2 kids that were very nice kids, but they had an entrepreneurial habit and they were growing some greenery in the backyard. Okay, you all know what that is. They're growing cannabis. Now, the landlord or the property management company hired Terminex to come out and do the normal inspection. So they come and do it, and it's fine. You know, they come every year. Later, the police department in an unnamed municipality came in and bashed the door in. That ended up costing a couple $1,000s to fix, and seized a couple little pipes and a plant. Now, the lawyer father of this was able to get it all tossed, but the probable cause came from the Terminex man. And upon investigation, it was discovered that the Terminex company, and I have no problem naming them because they were doing this, had hired an ex-felon who became a confidential informer for a particular sheriff's department, and was going and using his job as a way to get in good with the authorities, and was turning in people right and left. So why I'm telling you all this story is for your own personal edification, or if you have properties you manage, if people have something they don't want seen, make sure when these consultants come through the house, it's all put away, because in this particular case, this CI actually was using this job as a way to lessen his sentence with the authorities. Now, this is a true story. And I had no idea this even occurred until we investigated it. And I was mad as a wet hornet for the client, like that this had happened. And then, of course, the company, Terminex, got fired. Now, Terminex is a good company, and I don't mean to just besmirch them so that, you know, don't sue me. Good company, but in this particular case, that's what happened. So I'll finish on that, Michelle.
Thanks,
People
Jay.
should be aware of that
Randy.
possibility.
Thank you for that, Randy. I know that having unpermitted improvements can particularly be scary for us as brokers. Okay, members, it's now time to open up for our questions and answers from our panel today. And Cub, I'm going to ask you to help facilitate this. And if you have any questions, you can use the panel down at the bottom where you see the chat, or you can raise your hand. Who would like to go first? Okay, I'll go. So, hey, Maggie, I have a question for you. You know, we were talking about CCRs and HOAs, and it's my understanding that several years ago, I guess, well, let's say 10 years ago, that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission came out and said that you needed to present the HOA docs or the CCRs to your clients prior to writing an offer. Do you know if that's still pertinent to today's market?
I would be way outside of my area of competence to speak to y'all's rules and regulations. I don't know. I know that we do get asked, you know, we will have agents ask us for them. And I know that some agents will list them in with the MLS documents.
Okay.
It's got to be best practice.
Absolutely.
I'll let one of the BICs speak to that. But when we have another lull, Randy's discussion on surveys, I just wanted to be like, preach, because I'm head of our title team, and those are the other scary stories I could tell. My parents are particularly good at buying houses with no surveys, and those are some fun horror stories.
So I would like to address the covenant thing because it's particularly tricky now with people having to make offers after 10 minutes in a house and by the end of the day. And it's challenging for realtors to present covenants and stand behind the fact that that's all the covenants that exist. And I had this happen to me once where there was this one addendum, amendment to a covenant a couple of years later that pertained only to this one lot. And, you know, I didn't find it. I'm not professional attorney. I don't do title searches for a living. This is
Right.
title search work. And I learned from that at that time, it's like, I'm not putting covenants out for people to tell me that I failed to do it. I'm just going to disclose that they have to get them on their own if they're interested in the property. So it's challenging the covenant issue.
I think the
because-
challenge, oh, sorry, Jay.
Yeah, I'd love for you to answer this, Maggie.
I mean, I think it's particularly challenging, exactly as you said, with the with how fast offers have to be made. And you're gonna gather very quickly, I have an extreme pet peeve right now with the current market and these due diligence fees. I mean, how can you do your due diligence? Ask, you know, let's talk about those days gone past when due diligence actually represented the amount of the carrying cost for the period that you were going to do your due diligence in, right? I mean, in my mind, that's what due diligence was. Here is the $500 that it costs to carry this house for 2 weeks while I do my research. Well, then the guy who wants to do target practice and the dogs, you get that contract as the agent, you get that contract into the attorney and say, I know this is not how it's normally done, but we need, or sometimes it is, we need that title work done before due diligence, right? Because then it is on us. I need to know the terms of those covenants. Then we're out $500 if something's wrong, but it's how fast it has to be made, and that earnest money and especially due diligence amounts that really put buyers in a bind and create the liability for agents who haven't disclosed, even though exactly what Jay said, you guys don't do title searches, and it's not your job to interpret the legal language of those covenants.
I'd like to just add something that I really do feel that with the due diligence and the high fees, that we as agents should warn our clients and be very diligent with them about doing as much homework as they can do. You know, it's always about websites. It's always about get on the internet. You know, most communities do have their covenants posted, but, you know, advising them, it's always, you know, the disclosure part. Make sure that you let them know these may not be the most recent covenants, that, you know, check with the management company. And, you know, before you put down 30,000 in due diligence and risk losing it, check on those things. Make sure that your offer is responsible. And I think as agents, it is our responsibility to keep things under control and to make sure that they don't just rush into, or that part of their offer, you know, is subject to them examining that and not risking their due diligence. I mean, go to an attorney and have that written into the offer.
I think it's important that what Jessica said, that we shouldn't rush and rush our clients, even though this market has kind of pushed us to be competitive. We should actually, before you put that heavy money down, have reviewed those covenants, because there's two types of issues that are out here. One, some of these communities, if you're buying in the country, the covenants may have expired, or they have extender clauses that could be close to expiring. And if they have expired, and the agent may not even know they expired, they could be selling a trust, and the kids that own the property that mama and dad own never even lived there. They don't know this, and you really need to know this, because if you have expired covenants, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And then the other thing to know up front about getting the covenants and getting them from the Register of Deeds is the amendments that could be on there, but also what's the current situation with the homeowners association? Are they the kind of HOA that is very picky and very fundamentalist, and every little thing's going to be a problem? Are they involved with lawsuits? Are they putting liens on all the properties? Or are they more reasonable, kind of down the middle? Or are they not enforcing anything, which also could be a liability situation? You really need to understand that, because if you get into a situation with an HOA that actually has outstanding lawsuits, you could be investing, or your clients could be investing in a situation where they're going to be hit with massive fees because reserve funds are drained. And suddenly everyone's going to have to throw back in because they spent $50,000 on a lawsuit that went nowhere. These are things you can do a little research, ask questions, and get answers to before you tell your client to put down $250,000 in due diligence or $50,000 in due diligence, and then they end up losing it because they're not going to want to live there.
I want to give a quick tip, because to me, if I were an agent and didn't look at covenants all day, every day as my job, my life is fun. I would be asking, well, how do I know if they have covenants? So there are going to be some obvious ones, right? I mean, the Briar Chapels of the world, it's going to say of Briar Chapel in the legal description on the deed. When we get to the part that is the legal description describing the property, the flags that would give me red flag that this has covenants, or whatever color flag, covenant colored flag, it is described by a lot number, lot 1, 2, 147, that sort of thing. Condominiums will say a condominium unit created in condominium book. So those are easy. And usually you will understand, you'll be able to see that it's a condominium just looking at it, but not always. Some townhomes look a whole lot like townhomes, but they're condominiums. And the other one is that it's a recently recorded plat. And recently really is in the last 30 years, I would say. So for example, I live smack in downtown Durham, and mine is lot 13 of plat book 5B 147 or something. That's ancient. I have no restrictive covenants. But when you have a plat and a plat number, and it was recorded, say since 1990, that plat was, then you have a common ownership, common development. And that usually means it was done under the Planned Unit Development Code, North Carolina laws, there's covenants, and that's the governing law. And Randy can correct me, it sounds like he's actually done these.
Yeah, law, the 47F, everything after January 1st, 1999, exactly. I think also we could probably do a whole session, Cub and Michelle and Jessica, just on reading deeds and training attorneys, training our agents to work with attorneys to read the deeds, because there are a rank order of what in the deed actually has precedence between senior and junior. So people get hung up on distances, but distances are very low on the list of what matters. So some of those old deeds that say go to the old white oak tree and go here and there, those are actually senior deeds that could have more land and that could be sold if you can find and locate those, than ones that say go 300 feet this direction. And you can have situations with the deed over time that a gap was created because they didn't deed the entire property out, and so gaps start forming. So this gets back to the issue of having a very good surveyor to work with and a very good title attorney, because if you're going to work with land in North Carolina, you need those two things in your corner, or else you're going to have a lot of problems. And Jay in their practice works a lot with land, and obviously Maggie knows because she said that surveying and somebody to work with you on your title or key. Because we've had many, many cases where there are gaps and overlaps because the deeds had an error or a problem.
Yeah, I want to say that I have had personal experience with deeds that were not correct. And boy, it really holds up a closing and can mess up the sale completely because you didn't look into it early enough. I also wanted to mention, as Maggie was talking about the key issue, not giving keys early, we have all as a group become very lax about that. And, real estate school, and, when I first became an agent, it was really important that we observed it had to record before you gave out a key. And yet I had a personal experience where I had to go and get the keys back. The attorney said, go ahead and give them the keys. And it was a new home, and the builder said, yeah, go ahead, give them the keys. And there was a judgment lien that held up the recording, and it was a Friday afternoon when we got the call, and the movers were already moving furniture into the house, and we didn't know that the judgment lien was going to be cleared up in any quick time. And I actually had to go remove the keys from my agent's hand, or from my client's hand, and tell the movers to take it all back out. It was a very bad situation. So again, those are the kinds of mistakes that can really be very costly and get a lot of people really angry.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We will be having some future topics, CCRs, HOAs, deeds, tax cards, title searches. So keep abreast of what we're going to be putting out there on the website and choose and everything. And if there are no other questions, going once, going twice. Well, that's scary. There's not 3 chances. But thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon on another roundtable. And thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great weekend and a safe holiday. Take care.